I've really been thinking a lot about the Marxist critique of Western culture, especially the fundamental Marxist critique is something, a fundamental Marxist critique is a criticism of the fact that in capitalist societies, a disproportionate amount of the spoils, let's say, the wealth, goes to a disproportionately small part of the community. And this is, of course, a truism, by the way. It is the case that that occurs, which is why the richest dozen people in the world have as much money as the bottom 2 billion, something like that. It's also the case, it's part of a more generalized law, sometimes called Price's law, and represented with the Pareto distribution. Pareto is Pareto, showing that not only do the bulk of the spoils, let's say the wealth, go to a disproportionately small number of people, but the bulk of the productive work is also done by a disproportionately small number of people. Not necessarily the same people that have the wealth, by the way, although in a functional society there's some overlap. Now, Marx was correct in observing that that happened in capitalist societies, but incorrect in assuming that there are any societies that have ever been formulated or that could ever be formulated that would escape from that destiny. Because you see that same tremendous Pareto distribution, that proclivity of wealth to accrue in the hands of a small number of people. You see that in every human society that's ever been studied. And if it's not wealth, it's sexual access or reproductive, well, that's the same thing, reproductive opportunity, let's say, or material possessions, which is obviously a form of wealth, etc. So one of the things that characterizes the West is that although our societies produce inequality, like every other society, including animal societies, by the way, and even among plants, even among stars, a disproportionate number of the heavenly bodies have most of the mass, by the way, which is not something that you can lay at the feet of Western capitalism. The thing that the West has been able to do that other societies haven't been able to do is to produce wealth along with inequality. And that wealth is definitely, a fair proportion of that wealth is actually going to benefit the people who are in the direst straits. And that process has been accelerating over the last 20 years. So from the year 2000 till the year 2012, the level of absolute poverty in the world is halved, which is the fastest rate of economic development in the history of the world. And I think that rate is accelerating, at least in part because the Soviet Union, for example, isn't around anymore to agitate the economic masters and leaders of developing countries into the adoption of counterproductive collectivist economic strategies. And so what appears to be happening is that as we spread the fundamental Western ethos of individuality and private property and free markets and freedom in general for men and for women around the world, that the poorest people are becoming, well, at least they're not starving, they're becoming richer, even though at the same time we do pay a price for that in inequality. So there's a rule, and I don't know how to formulate it exactly, or there seems to be a rule, which is a given unit of wealth is produced at the cost of certain production of inequality, a certain number of units of inequality. And that seems to be inalienable to some degree. So anyways, that's part of a Marxist critique, the poem first, which is like, you want to listen to that poem a couple of times, I would say. But then more fundamentally, a critique of the Marxist critique of the West. Yes, the West produces inequality, but it's not something that you can lay at the feet of capitalism. It's a much, much deeper problem. And what that means too is that those people who purport to be on the side of the poor and dispossessed are not being friends to them by any stretch of the imagination at all, by attempting to tear down the very hierarchies that seem to be leveraging the world's poorest people out of poverty as rapidly as possible. There's evidence as well that people start to become very concerned about the environment if you can get their family income, I think, or its GDP, I think, up above about 4,500 US a year. They start to have a little bit of spare time to be concerned with the environment around them. And so the right way to ecological balance in the world seems to be to make people rich as fast as we possibly can, to make the poor rich as fast as we possibly can. And wouldn't that be lovely if that was really the way out?